Hello and welcome to Baiju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This editorial refers to possible attempts being made to revive the Khalistan movement, and hence it calls upon the Indian security agencies to exercise constant vigilance. The Khalistan movement is a terrorist insurgent movement that dates back to the 1980s and 1990s, through which radical extremists were seeking to liberate the Indian state of Punjab and establish it as an independent country known as Khalistan. This violent terrorist and insurgent movement enjoyed widespread support within the state of Punjab and as well as amongst few sections of the Sikh diaspora in North America, Europe and Southeast Asia, and it was supported and sustained with the covert support of Pakistan's ISI as a part of its proxy war against India. But through decisive police action and intelligence efforts, India had managed to neutralize the movement in the 1990s, and since then it had become a dead and dormant movement. But however, over the last one decade, multiple attempts have been made to revive the movement, not just in India, but also amongst the Sikh diaspora in North America, Europe and other parts of the world. Just a few days ago, the Delhi police, with the support of the NIA and the Central Intelligence Agencies, carried out an arrest of a terror module which, according to the Delhi police, involves a group of Khalistan and Kashmir based terrorists. Over here, the editorial tries to exercise caution, and it states that the Khalistan movement is a long dead and buried movement, and clearly it has lost the popular support not just in India but also around the world. So these claims of the Delhi police will have to be thoroughly verified and investigated before drawing any conclusions about the revival of Khalistan movement. But that being said, the editorial acknowledges that there is some evidence available to indicate that Pakistan's ISI has been making an attempt over the last 10 to 15 years to revive this dormant movement, not just within the Indian state of Punjab, but also amongst the Sikh diaspora. And alarmingly, Pakistan's ISI has been trying to create a link between the Khalistan movement and the militant movement in Kashmir. In fact, the origins of the Khalistan movement and the Kashmir militancy traces back a common origin to Pakistan's ISI and its covert activities in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region back in the 1980s. During this period, Pakistan's ISI was working with the CIA of the United States to train and sponsor the Afghan Mujahideen in Afghanistan as a form of guerrilla resistance against the occupying Soviet forces. So Pakistan had emerged as a key ally of the United States in its covert war against the Soviet Union, and Pakistan managed to exploit this leverage, and it conveniently diverted a part of the funds and the weapons that it was receiving from the US and other allies to instigate a covert proxy war against India by first sponsoring the Khalistan movement in Punjab and later sponsoring the Kashmir militancy in Jammu and Kashmir. There is no doubt that Pakistan would stand to gain by linking the two movements, and even after the Khalistan movement had been more or less neutralized by India, Pakistan has been trying to revive the Khalistan movement and link it up with the Kashmir militancy. Meanwhile, in India, baseless allegations have been floated around by few irresponsible media outlets which have tried to link the ongoing farmer protests in Punjab and Haryana with the dormant Khalistan movement by claiming that the protests are being sponsored by Khalistan sympathizers. As discussed, the Khalistan movement has lost popular support in both the urban and rural areas of Punjab, and it has only been kept alive by a few fringe elements in India and by few radical extremists amongst the Sikh diaspora. This is where the Indian government and the security agencies will have to be extremely cautious. While they have to maintain constant vigilance with regard to these fringe and radical elements, it needs to ensure that such baseless allegations are not supported in any way in order to prevent from adding any further fuel to the fire, which might lead to the creation of actual disaffection on the ground. While maintaining constant vigilance over the activities of these fringe elements in India and as well as over the radical extremists who enjoy limited support within the Sikh diaspora on foreign soil, the Indian government and the security agencies will have to remain open to the possibility of the movement being revived at the behest of ISI and any possible attempts to link it up with Kashmir militancy. Because of late it has been observed that there is a strong social media campaign going on that points towards attempts being made to revive the Khalistan movement not just in India but also abroad. On the 5th of December, we discussed in detail how a few radical Khalistani elements present amongst the Sikh diaspora in Canada have derailed the India-Canada relationship. Of late, Khalistani activity amongst few fringe and radical elements within the Sikh diaspora has picked up in Canada, in United States, and as well as in a number of European countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and even in Southeast Asia, in countries such as Malaysia and Thailand. On the social media as well, a call has been given for a Khalistan 2020 referendum, and we have also witnessed a number of motivated protests being carried out in these countries in front of the Indian High Commission and Indian consulates. All of this points to attempts being made by Pakistan's ISI with the support of a few fringe radical elements to try and revive the dormant Khalistan movement. But however, the bigger concern for India would be the linking up between Khalistan movement and Kashmir militancy. Hence, the editorial is calling upon the Indian government and the Indian security agencies to maintain constant vigilance over the activities of Khalistan sympathizers without raising any unnecessary fears amongst the common people of Punjab. Then if India has to eliminate any possible connections between the Khalistan movement and Kashmir militancy, then it will have to acknowledge the changing dynamics in Kashmir, which has directly contributed to a significant increase in violence in the recent past. See, the Kashmir militancy witnessed its peak in the 1990s and early 2000s. But post 2010, due to a combination of several regional and global developments, there was a gradual decline in violence and terrorist activities in Kashmir between 2011 and 2015. But from 2015 onwards, as tensions between India and Pakistan started to rise, Pakistan has stepped up support to Kashmir-centric groups, and this has directly contributed to a significant increase in violence post-2015. Then last year, in August 2019, after the Indian government revoked the special status of J&K under Article 370 and reorganized the state of Jammu and Kashmir into a union territory, there has been a major backlash on the ground against this unilateral approach of the government, and this has again contributed to increased militant terrorist activities in Kashmir. Pakistan has latched onto this opportunity, and it has been trying to exploit the disaffection that has been created on the ground in Kashmir as a result of India's policies concerning Article 370 and the statehood of J&K. So over the last 3 to 4 years, Pakistan has consistently enabled cross-border infiltration of terrorists into Kashmir, and it is for this reason that the Pakistani army and the border guarding forces frequently violate the ceasefire with India in order to provide cover fire to the terrorists who are infiltrating across the line of control. So it is quite safe to assume that Pakistan's ISI would stand to gain by trying to link the Khalistan movement with Kashmir militancy, and hence it is time for India to acknowledge the changing dynamics in Kashmir and initiate a new political process to heal the wounds that have been caused by India's policies and try and restore statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. Now let's look at a column from page number 7. This column evaluates the potential for India to establish itself as a powerhouse for artificial intelligence. See, currently, the world has entered the 4th stage of the Industrial Revolution that is largely powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, big data, and IoT, or the Internet of Things. As a result of these emerging technologies, the global economy is already getting transformed, and the COVID-19 pandemic has simply created even more opportunities for these emerging technologies. The challenges created by the pandemic has disrupted the normal economy and the normal functioning of the society, and hence a number of traditional services and traditional functions are being supplemented and replaced by AI and machine learning algorithms. Take for example how the Telangana police enforced traffic laws during the lockdown by using artificial intelligence enabled automated number plate recognition software in order to catch the traffic violators. Similarly, artificial intelligence and machine learning has come in handy to supplement and replace a number of traditional functions and traditional jobs, including that of healthcare professionals, medical researchers, public health authorities, and local administrators, especially with regard to monitoring and predicting the trend and spread of the pandemic. For example, data modeling was extensively used to predict the possible spread of the pandemic. Then, as we discussed yesterday, artificial intelligence-based algorithms have been used to study the protein structure of SARS-CoV-2. So, accompanied with this increased usage of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms during the pandemic, we have also observed a significant increase in internet consumption during the lockdowns. According to the Department of Telecommunications, internet usage during the lockdown increased by 13%, and this would have definitely contributed a gold mine of data that can be harnessed, because quality data and increased data points are absolutely essential to drive these AI and machine learning algorithms. These algorithms are designed to learn on their own depending on the data that is fed into them. So the accuracy and efficiency of these self-learning algorithms is directly dependent on the quality of data that is fed into them, and it is also dependent on the range of data points that is supplied to them. So more the data and better the data quality, better would be the accuracy and prediction of these AI and machine learning algorithms. Next, the writer evaluates the progress that India has achieved with regard to artificial intelligence. The writer says that India is emerging as a lead country in the field of artificial intelligence thanks to the several government initiatives and the initiatives taken by the private sector. These initiatives of the government and the private sector has driven up investments in the field of artificial intelligence over the last few years. The overall policy framework for artificial intelligence has been brought out by the Niti Aayog, and this national strategy for AI has triggered the private sector and the government institutions to focus on capacity building in artificial intelligence by making the right kind of investments. The national strategy for AI of the Niti Aayog envisions AI for all, and it seeks to promote inclusive growth of artificial intelligence in the country in order to ensure that these emerging technologies have the desired social impact. For this purpose, key sectors for inclusive growth have been identified, which includes education, healthcare, agriculture, smart cities, infrastructure, transportation, etc. So India's national strategy for AI is not just focused on creating AI solutions for businesses and for the government sector, but it is also focused on ensuring inclusive growth in all the sectors in order to have the desired social impact. Apart from these national level initiatives, the state governments such as Karnataka, Maharashtra, Telangana and Tamil Nadu, they have already come out with their own policies and strategies in order to nurture a AI ecosystem in their respective states by exploiting their current potential in the field of information technology. This support by the central and the state governments has led a number of global technology companies, including a number of Indian companies, to set up R&D centers for AI and even centers of excellence, which is driving cutting-edge research in the field of artificial intelligence. So the right kind of policy support from the government and the self-initiative of the private sector has enabled a thriving startup ecosystem for artificial intelligence in India. Hundreds of AI-based startups have come up across the country, and they are primarily focused on designing several applications based on AI and machine learning, which is not only helping solve business problems and governance problems, but it is also helping create solutions with a social impact. As a result of this rise in AI adoption in the country, the talent pool has significantly increased over the last few years, and according to estimates, close to 500,000 skilled workforce is already employed in the AI sector. Estimates also indicate a bright future for AI in the country because in the next 5 years, data and artificial intelligence alone is expected to account for close to $450 to $500 billion in India's GDP, which is around 10% of the government's aspiration of a $5 trillion economy. Sectors such as consumer goods and retail, agriculture, banking and finance in particular have tremendous potential for AI adoption, and by focusing on these areas, the government, with the support of the private sector, can hope to generate large-scale employment somewhere in the range of 20 million jobs in the coming 5 years. And this would not only help in creating specific solutions for governance and business-related challenges, but it would also help in addressing a number of social challenges. And as it has always been, technology is the greatest enabler to demolish inequality in the society. So considering this progress that India has achieved in the field of artificial intelligence, the writer says that India has tremendous potential to establish itself as a powerhouse for AI. But however, there are 3 particular areas which need to be addressed immediately in order to create a fertile ground for India to emerge as a powerhouse for AI. First, the writer points out the lack of availability of skilled workforce as a major challenge for India. So the first priority area should be talent development in order to create the right kind of manpower and workforce which can lead innovations in the field of artificial intelligence. In the core research areas of AI, India had a workforce of around 40,000 in 2018 and this has jumped to 72,000 by 2019. But even this increase is not sufficient to match up to the demand, and hence the government will have to work with universities to create a dedicated stream of AI professionals who can contribute to the development of the sector. Next, India is lacking a robust legal framework that can provide for ethical usage of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, because these technologies, which rely entirely upon harnessing of data, might lead to violation of data security and data privacy of the citizens. In this regard, the government had set up the Justice B. N. Srikrishna Committee, and based on the recommendations, the government has already tabled the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 in the Parliament. But however, the bill has run into a number of controversies on the grounds of privacy violation, and currently it is being examined by a joint parliamentary committee. Then, to deal with non-personal data, the government has already constituted a committee under Chris Gopalakrishnan, and the recommendations of this committee has already been submitted to the government. But however, the government is dragging its feet with regard to bringing out a comprehensive legal framework that can protect data security and data privacy and strike a balance with the need for harnessing data, as it is the fuel that is needed to drive artificial intelligence. The next area of challenge for India is the lack of quality data in the country. Even though the adoption of digital technologies has increased in the country, there is a need for greater digitization, and there is a need for better quality technology and digital infrastructure so that the available data can be analyzed and processed in the most efficient manner in order to generate high quality data that can feed AI algorithms. Now let's take up an article from page number 10 that is related to the 36th Charter Day anniversary of SAARC. SAARC stands for South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, that was established on the 8th of December in 1985. As the name itself indicates, its primary objective was to promote regional cooperation in South Asia, and when it was established in 1985, it included all the South Asian countries, that is India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Maldives. Then later in 2007, at the insistence of India, even Afghanistan was included as a member of SAARC, even though technically Afghanistan is not a part of South Asia. Since its establishment, the key mandate of the organization has been to promote regional integration and economic integration in South Asia. Such regional and economic integration can be achieved by promoting better connectivity amongst the member countries, by providing for improved road, maritime and air connectivity, and this requires the simplification of laws related to immigration, the lifting of some restrictions with regard to border control, and even a dedicated motor vehicles agreement and air agreements in order to provide for improved connectivity. Then to improve trade within the region and promote economic integration, we need free trade agreements which will harmonize the taxes, that is the customs and the import duties, and maybe even establish a common monetary union just like the European Union has done. If such regional and economic integration was promoted by SAARC, and if these objectives were achieved, it would have enabled the free flow of goods, services and people amongst the South Asian countries. So the objective of any such regional organization is to improve the relations amongst the member countries through regional and economic integration, and this also serves as an economic incentive to resolve the mutual disputes amongst the member countries. But however, these ambitious objectives of SAARC have never been realized, primarily because of Pakistan's activities in the region. Pakistan has repeatedly derailed all the initiatives at SAARC, which were usually taken at the insistence of India, and examples include the derailment of the SAARC Motor Vehicles Agreement and even the SAARC satellite that was proposed by India. These deliberate hurdles posed by Pakistan led India to abandon a SAARC Motor Vehicles Agreement, and instead India pushed for a sub-regional initiative known as BBIN involving just Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh and India. Similarly, India went ahead with the SAARC satellite project by renaming it as the South Asia Satellite. Pakistan has repeatedly derailed such Indian initiatives at SAARC, primarily to counter India's predominant influence in South Asia. Then along with this, through its covert activities, Pakistan has stepped up hostility in the region, especially with India and even with Afghanistan, by supporting a variety of terror groups which have ended up aggravating the regional and communal divide in South Asia. So it is in this context that the Prime Minister of India has sent out a strong message to Pakistan on the occasion of 36th Charter Day anniversary of SAARC. In a letter written to the SAARC Secretariat to mark the 36th Charter Day anniversary, the Prime Minister has stated that for the SAARC to realize its full potential, what we need is an environment that is free of terror and violence, and the members of the grouping will have to work together to put an end to those forces which are supporting terrorism in the region. In fact, it is on these grounds that India had boycotted the 2016 SAARC summit, which was supposed to be hosted by Pakistan. In 2016, Pakistan-based terror outfit, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, carried out the Uri attacks against an Indian army base camp, and this led India to boycott the SAARC summit, and India even managed to use its influence to convince the other members to boycott the SAARC summit as well. Since then, India has engaged in coercive diplomacy against Pakistan, and it has pursued a SAARC minus Pakistan strategy. So as a result, India started sidelining SAARC as a regional grouping, and it tried to revive a dormant organization known as BIMSTEC. But today, Pakistan has been complaining that SAARC has been derailed because of India's boycott of the organization. But we can say that these claims of Pakistan is unjustified, because despite repeated provocations from Pakistan, India has taken yet another initiative in the SAARC region, especially after the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic. As soon as the pandemic broke out, the Prime Minister took up an initiative to hold a virtual summit with the SAARC leaders, and India even announced the establishment of a SAARC COVID-19 emergency fund by providing a contribution of $10 million. The other SAARC members as well have pooled together another $10 million, and these funds are being used to provide for emergency medical supplies to the SAARC members to help them overcome the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. After playing a lead role in the establishment of this emergency fund, India even announced medical aid worth around $1 million to friendly countries in South Asia such as Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Maldives, and even to Sri Lanka. This makes it quite clear that India has made repeated attempts over the last 35 years to bring the South Asian countries together under SAARC and help the organization realize its ambitious objectives. But however, Pakistan's disruptive role and hostile approach has derailed the functioning of SAARC, and it has prevented the regional organization from achieving its objectives. It is in this context that the statement made by the Prime Minister acquires a lot of significance. Now let's take up an article from page number 13. Britain and European Union have struck a deal to resolve the issues surrounding Ireland's border following Brexit. The United Kingdom has agreed to drop several clauses that were in breach of the Brexit withdrawal agreement, and this allows the United Kingdom to enforce the withdrawal agreement from the 1st of January 2021. Having formally quit the European Union following Brexit, Britain currently is in the process of making a complete withdrawal from the European Union. And to formalize the withdrawal process, a withdrawal agreement has been finalized, but still there are plenty of issues with the withdrawal agreement that threatens to jeopardize the future of economic relations between Britain and the European Union countries. One such issue was the nature of border control between Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, which continues to be a member of the European Union. According to this article, this issue over border control has been resolved between Britain and European Union, and let's have a more detailed discussion on this topic in the coming days, because there are bound to be many more articles and columns as the date for the enforcement of the withdrawal agreement approaches. Now let's take up another article from page number 13. Sri Lanka has announced its first large-scale Chinese investment in manufacturing in the country. A Chinese tire manufacturing company will be investing $300 million in Sri Lanka to set up a tire manufacturing facility near the strategic deep-sea port of Hambantota. The Hambantota port, located in the southern part of Sri Lanka, is considered to be a part of Chinese string of pearls that are designed to encircle India. Having agreed to be a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, Sri Lanka has received a lot of investments in strategic infrastructure projects, including the Hambantota port and the nearby Matala airport, the Colombo Port City project, and several other infrastructure projects. This large-scale borrowing by Sri Lanka from China has pushed the country into severe debt, and strategic experts believe that this strategy of China of placing a massive debt burden on small economies is a part of its debt trap diplomacy. Naturally, these developments, including massive Chinese investments in strategic infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, accompanied with the large-scale investment in Sri Lanka's manufacturing sector, is a cause for concern for India. Now let's take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? India's regulatory framework for drug approval has a specific provision for the grant of emergency use authorization under the new Drugs and Clinical Trial Rule 2019. Such approvals are granted by the Cabinet Committee on Security. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect, because such emergency approval for the usage of drugs and vaccines are granted by the Drugs Controller General of India, which is a part of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So the correct answer is option A, 1 only. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 1. According to this article, pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies such as Pfizer, Bharat Biotech and the Serum Institute of India have applied for emergency approval for their COVID-19 vaccines with the Drugs Controller General of India as per the provisions of new Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules of 2019. So it is expected that the DCGI might grant emergency authorization for the usage of these COVID-19 vaccines, and in this anticipation, the central government has already started working with the state governments in order to roll out a strategy and a plan for the administration and distribution of vaccines. Let's look at the next question. The Pamban Rail Bridge is located between Park Strait and the Gulf of Mannar. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because on page number 1, the Hindu carries an image that depicts the movement of mechanized fishing boats after Cyclone Burevi across the Pamban Rail Bridge, which connects mainland Tamil Nadu with Rameshwaram, and this colonial era rail bridge is located between Park Strait and the Gulf of Mannar. Let's look at the next question. Under Bharatmala Pariyojana, which category of roads are covered? Economic corridors, border and international connectivity roads, coastal and port connectivity roads, greenfield expressways. All the 4 are included under Bharatmala Pariyojana, so option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 1 that makes a reference to Bharatmala Pariyojana. It is an ambitious connectivity project undertaken by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways in order to strengthen the highway infrastructure in the country. Let's look at the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? Mount Everest straddles the India-Nepal border. Its official height was measured at 8,848 meters in 1954 by the Survey of India. Recently, its height has been revised to 8,848.86 meters. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because Mount Everest straddles the Nepal-China border. It is located on the border between Nepal and Tibet. So the correct answer is option C, 2 and 3 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 1, the height of Mount Everest has been revised by China and Nepal. Let's look at the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? Dibru-Saikhowa National Park is located in Arunachal Pradesh. It has been designated as a biosphere reserve. It is known to contain hydrocarbon reserves. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because the Dibru-Saikhowa National Park and Biosphere Reserve is located in Assam, not in Arunachal Pradesh. So the correct answer is option C, 2 and 3 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 4, the Guwahati High Court has issued a stay order for the environmental clearance that was given to Oil India Limited for drilling operations at 7 locations beneath the Dibru-Saikhowa National Park. Let's look at the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? Lead and nickel ingestion may lead to toxicity. They may affect the neurological system and cause epilepsy, vomiting, breathing problems, convulsions, temporary loss of memory, dizziness and other symptoms. Both the statements are correct. Lead and nickel, they are known for their toxicity, and lead is a heavy metal which is also a neurotoxin. So it is known to affect the neurological system. So both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, traces of nickel and lead have been found in the patient blood samples who were affected by a mysterious illness in the Eluru region of Andhra Pradesh. Let's look at a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper with reference to the role of UN Habitat in the United Nations program working towards a better urban future. Which of the statements are correct? UN Habitat has been mandated by the United Nations General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities to provide adequate shelter for all. Its partners are either governments or local urban authorities only. UN Habitat contributes to the overall objective of the UN system to reduce poverty and to promote access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect because UN Habitat partners not just with governments and local urban authorities, but it also ties up with the private sector and as well as with other stakeholders in the urban areas. So the correct answer is option B, 1 and 3 only. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, the Khalistan movement has become dormant and non-existent, but security agencies must watch out for any possible attempts aimed at its revival. Elucidate. The second question, examine the specific areas that need attention if India is aiming to become the artificial intelligence powerhouse of the world. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.